Hello and welcome to the lecture for Module 2, Chapter 3, Company Organization. We've already seen different types of companies back in Chapter 2, the last module, where we have corporations, partnerships, LLCs, limited liability partnerships. There's all kinds of different organizations legally and how they're structured. But it doesn't necessarily, other than somewhat of a C corporation, the large corporations, which would have stockholders as owners and a board of directors, and then officers, and then managers and employees. I mean, that particular type of structure is usually only reserved for the C corps, the large corporations. But the company structure underneath is how it operates. So if you're a C corp, if we're looking at your officers, your CEO, your chief financial officer, the COO, whatever all the C's and O's are, all those titles, and then everybody below. But most companies aren't set up that way. A lot of companies are going to be, today's world, are going to be LLCs. A lot of times the developer will have a new LLC for each project they work on. It's very easy to organize one, very easy to maintain it for accounting purposes and tax purposes, and it limits the liability of the owners very well. So this week, again, we're going to be looking at organization. A company has got to be organized. I'm going to look at some of the things in the book and then hit some highlights from the PowerPoint presentation. Literally, without organization, your company's going to fail. Even myself, I have 2 LLCs. I did have an S Corp, but I've closed it. I have 2 LLCs. And while I'm the sole proprietor, only employee, however else you want to call it, I still have to have organization. I get help. My wife helps me with all the organization. Any given point in time, you can't see them, but I look around my office here and I have 2 large whiteboards, and I currently probably have about 50 clients between serving and law that I have to active clients that I need to keep track of. So organization is extremely important, even for a single employee LLC as my own. But that's not going to be enough to run a construction company. So the types of organization that we're going to look at is, we'll look at the principles. There's types that a PowerPoint presentation mentions, but some of the principles of how to set up an organization are listed in 3.4. And it's a very good list on page 65 of the textbook. It talks about list every duty that must be performed for a successful operation of the company. You got to think about these particular things here. Are a lot of the questions are part of a business plan. I say, because business plan also have projected financials. So when you're looking at it, you got to think about everything your company is going to do. If your company is simply, let's just say, a grocery store, something very simple, you think it's simple, it's just going to buy groceries from a wholesaler, a distributor, and we're going to put them on the shelf and we're going to sell them. Well, you need to have a manager, somebody over top of it. You need to have somebody who can hire people. You need to have someone to be able to order the proper food from the vendors, the middlemen, the distributors. You're going to have somebody manage your inventory. You're going to have somebody deal with accounting, somebody to deal with human resources. So, and the list goes on. I mean, you're going to have someone train. It's not just, we're going to do something simple and quick and start a store and sell some groceries. There's a lot of things that fall in place, let alone a construction company. You're looking at a lot of people, and the larger the construction company, the more projects they have going on, the more people they would need. So once you list all the duties that could possibly be done, you start looking at things that you need to divide them up with, sort of department heads, so to speak, or some sort of oversight, if you want to say officer, maybe, if it's a financial or human resources, however you want to label people. But you almost need to have somebody over every facet of a company. Um, those types of people, as you label them, you start up at the top with like an owner, and then you're going to have a layer of people underneath that handle a particular part. It could be production, it could be, so, a construction company, you could easily have people under the executive dealing with all the business planning. You could people have accounting and payroll. They got to deal with all the billings and collection, payroll, area of procurement. Where are you going to get your supplies from? That's a whole thing in itself. Construction company, you're going to build, it's just a simple, you think a simple thing of a 3-story apartment building, something that's got 100 apartments in it, all of them pretty much the same. You're going to buy the same door, you're going to buy the same stoves, same microwave, the same refrigerator 100 times. Where do you get them all? What if a vendor doesn't have 100 refrigerators, only has 50? And then somebody else only has 25, but you need to put them all in there because you're getting ready to get a use and occupancy permit and need a refrigerator. You need to rent these units. So you have to have somebody in procurement that is ahead of the game and has all of that stuff in place. You're going to have an estimator. You got no idea what you're going to spend until somebody looks at a set of plans, and we'll get into that a little bit in the next chapter. A set of architectural drawings, a set of engineering drawings, all your subs, your plumbing, your electrical, some structural stuff, if there's a structural steel or anything like that, lighting, depending on what it is, you might have acoustics, but all these different places, HVAC is a big one. All these different disciplines have a set of plans. And you need an estimator to look over all of them to determine how much you're going to need to spend, how long it's going to take, what's going to be required if you try to build it. So all of those things are in place, and we haven't even gotten to actual construction operations where somebody is in the field, on the ground, monitoring and making sure that something is built. These people that are in the construction operations side, they're the ones that are actually paying attention to see if a job is on budget. They're looking at things like safety, making sure we're on schedule, just complete monitoring of something once it's being planned out. And then you actually get to the people that are constructing, these actual laborers that are in the field building something with their hands and with the machines. And then the last thing that the book talked about was yard facilities. You got to have a place to store things. You can't always store them on a construction site. You need to have some offsite storage a lot of times, especially when, if it means to get materials today that you can get your hands on, whereas, a month from now, you need them, but you might not be able to get your hands on them. So there's a lot of things that go into play with organization. And as you list everything, as somebody did in your textbook in 3.41, 3.4.1, that particular type of scenario lays everything out. It divides the duties up amongst the different areas of a construction company. And then you can go from there to start to build your organizational chart. You may have something where you're building apartment buildings. You may have something where all you do is build highways. You might be involved in just building single family homes. But regardless, however you do it, you're going to have to lay out the same type of list list and organization to figure out who is what and who you need to have them do what. Many times with a small business, let's say a general contractor who builds single family homes. And let's just say that they're small scale and they're going to build, they're going to start one home a month. They're not going to finish a home in a month. They're going to finish that home in 60 to 80 days. That's a small builder. It's going to take them 2 to 3 months, usually less than 3 months, or they have problems if they're a 3-month mark. But they're going to want to start homes. And when they do this, a lot of them will just use subs. That's why they start them. They want to keep their subs active. They're not even employees. So, if you're going to start a house, you have to have a set of plans. You got to have a building permit. You have to have things in place like that. Then you have the owner of the company who may also he's probably the estimator, the general contractor. He probably does his own estimating. He may or may not do his own accounting. Likely he does not do his own accounting. Probably doesn't have much in the line of HR department. Might offer some benefits like vacation or health insurance, group health insurance or something, but might not because they're a small company. The next level of employee might be, they might do their own excavation. They might dig their own foundations and do their own site work. They might, or they might have, the only employees the guy might have or gal they might have is just maybe finishers, carpenters, but they're not going to have every discipline necessary to build a house. So below them is going to be a bunch of subcontractors, and we'll look more of this in chapter 4. But I picked this line of single family home because it shows you that even while something you think, okay, we're going to build one house, it doesn't even have to be a big mansion. But the idea is we're in business and we have to keep houses started and rolling so that everybody can stay active. A plumber can't do anything until the house is framed. Once the house is framed, the electrician can come in, the plumber can come in, they're working, HVAC can come in, but the carpenters are doing nothing. The framers are sitting idle. The same thing with guys doing the drywall, the flooring. They're all sitting idle, waiting for everybody else to get finished. That's why you have this process of going over and over and over, starting something new about every month so that everybody stays working. And that requires organization. You need a couple people for your project management. You need to make sure you're getting materials, that procurement. Right now we've had a shortage of materials in construction throughout all of COVID. So there's a lot of things that have to be put in place for structural purposes when deciding how you put your organization together. Most of us would work with smaller companies. However, you can get involved with somebody really big. The chart that's on page 72, figure 3.3, that's a medium-sized company, but it shows you where things are and how much help you need when you start to have a lot of work and a lot of projects. The PowerPoint presentation gives you some pluses and minuses of organizational structure, helps you break things down. And one of the things it does is it gives a list of alternative structures. You typically have like this pyramidal type structure that's on figure 3.3 in the book, but there are other types of structures involved. And the one that most of them have is like a functional organization, which is very similar to 3.3. Literally has a owner, a CEO, that type of person, and it has a department head, so to speak, under every aspect of that CEO. So for something like a construction company, you could have accountants, finance people, marketing, you got to go out and get work, and production, you got to build it. Still have HR. There's a lot of things that could fall into place still with under this functional organization. It is the most common organization because you end up with one person at the top ultimately responsible for things. It works good with small organizations. The larger you get, the harder it is for one person to make the call. That's why even with your large C corps, you might have one officer, a chief executive officer, that CEO, but he's going to answer to a board of directors. And that board of directors is going to select other officers, not necessarily the CEO. As you know, so looks like it's all one person, but even in that case, they start to divvy up the responsibilities. But with the functional organization, things dwindle down from the top in a pyramid fashion as well. And you end up with, project managers who are dealing with a single project at a time. And a lot of them will have to make decisions. They're given a lot of power to make decisions in the field, on the fly, and to make things work and happen and go smooth. There's a couple different types of functional organizations. Geographic is one of them where you literally will duplicate your functional organization. You'll duplicate it in another city. If a company has offices, say in DC, New York, and Atlanta, they're going to have a similar structure in each one of those offices. You could also have a large construction company that has a different structure, similar structure, but a different structure for different types of work. And that could be, let's just say there are some really large construction companies, and we're going to see a few videos from some of them. But those large companies, they could have an infrastructure department that does nothing but highways, or maybe city water and sewer work or something like that. And then there could be a branch that does, residential homes. Maybe they build subdivisions. Somebody, a large company, it'll go in and build a bunch of homes on an entire, 50 to 100 lots in a subdivision or something like that. And certainly you could have people that are that do nothing but say sticks of townhouses, and or multifamily development like that, or apartment buildings. Those are all different types of construction from a commercial office complex or commercial office building, multi-story commercial building, anything along those lines. They're different types of projects. While some parts of the construction are the same, they're not completely the same. The end result is different. The end user is different. And there's a lot of different pieces that go into play there. So product differentiation is a big deal in your functional organization. You're going to put out more than one product. And if you put out more than one product, you'll probably need more than one organizational chart. Some of the advantages of a functional organization, this pyramidal type, is it's a clear line of authority. The company ladder, who's above you is who you answer to. It also is great for career development. It's one of the things that I looked at 35 years ago when I got in the surveying business. Was I saw the company chart. This is where you are today. This is your title, your position. It takes this much experience and time to get to the next level, and on up and up and up until you can get to the top of the chart. Well, I never made it to the top of that organizational chart, but I used it to get advanced as quick as I could because I knew what my goals were. And I was able to get to where I needed to be and apply for my surveying license about as early as I possibly could at the time. And I used that organizational chart to get me the experience and know what I had to work on to get to the next step, the next place. So the organizational charts, these functional organizations, they do help with career development. They're definitely easy to follow. You also can just create you need something different. If you need to start doing research and development, maybe just create a little branch, just come down and move over one more spot and put somebody in charge of research and development. So it's easy to use, but one of the problems it has, and probably one of the biggest problems it has, is there's no real accountability over like a complete project. You have different branches coming down to create one thing at the bottom, and say that might be an apartment building. You got a lot of different, from the top down, all these different little matrix ladders getting you down, and then it's almost like, it's not drawn this way, but they almost feed back in. Each one of them have a part in a project. So overall accountability is tough to figure out where that's at. There's no project emphasis in a organizational chart that's a functional organization like that. Plus, you have a lot of problems as people try to advance. That's the glass ceiling, the backstabbing, all these different things that you might want to speak about, how you can't get up the ladder. You know, it's easy to use and manipulate, but it comes with a lot of problems. One of the other things that the better method here was, I'm looking here at my slides. One of the, you have an organization that can actually be for a standalone project where you can assign people. Now you can assign a person to more than one project, but a project manager becomes really responsible for a lot of activities, and the whole project falls on the one person and to get things done. It's a pretty common method for larger companies. One of the things that it has involved here is, you know, I'm sorry, one of the disadvantages though is cost and personnel. You're duplicating people. You know, if you got 20 projects and you start assigning yourself 20 accountants, well, you probably don't need that many. Excuse me. Probably don't need 20 accountants. You need to start figuring out, well, how do we divvy them up a little bit? How do we get people to do more than one project? Also, what happens is you lose an investment in the company. Your people are focused on one project, and they don't know what's going to happen at the end of that project. This is something that happens with union workers, not necessarily in companies, but a union worker. You're an electrician with the union hall, and you get assigned. The project has a need for 20 electricians. You become one of them, and you're assigned to a company. The company goes ahead and hires you out of the union hall, and you work on a nice job for 18 months. And in 17 months, you start wondering, where's your next job? You know, that company may or may not want you anymore. They might send you back to call it, putting you on the bench until another thing opens up. So it's definitely has its issues when you do something that is purely organizational structure, that's purely project specific. But large projects use something called a matrix, and I'm not going to read through every aspect of the matrix. You can certainly do that in the slides. But with the matrix organization, power resides a lot with the project manager. And if the project manager is a good matrix, will reside with the project manager. But if it's a bad matrix, it resides on what they call a functional manager. And if you got to look at the slides, the book doesn't speak of it very much. But I'm looking at which slide number is it? I don't have the numbers available. But if you look at that matrix organization for a large construction company, what you'll see is you have all these different department heads, and then you have each one of them having a part in a particular project, but you have these functional managers who are actually over top of the project, and they pull resources from, as the chart shows, like engineering, research and development, marketing, HR, finance, procurement, admin people. The list goes on and on for how they pull the resources, but it's an interesting look as to how not to duplicate efforts. I think that only applies to some really large projects and really large companies. Right or wrong, most people tend to have that functional organization more like the corporate ladder. So to wrap up chapter 3, the book speaks a little bit more about having manuals, policies, and procedures, and an employee handbook. These things are very important to protect the company. As a lawyer, I've read cases and I know things that sound stupid. But what if you have an employee who, stops at lunch in the company truck and, gets about 3 beers and, may or may not be well enough to drive, probably is, goes to work though, and, smells like beer, and, is probably a little bit impaired, his thinking's not clear. I mean, is there anything wrong with that? Well, of course we think there's something wrong with it. It's common sense, isn't it? Well, it's not in the employee handbook. I'm on lunch, drinking beer, it's my time. He didn't tell me I couldn't do it. So that's the type of thing that needs to be in your employee handbook. You need to spell out good details. I mean, I know companies that have like the no porn policy on their computers. If you don't tell somebody that, how do they know that you don't approve of it and it's fireable offense if it's not written down for them? But you also need other things that are play, that not just those things that protect the company from what we would consider to be silly or obvious, but you need to have a structure of how people are hired, how people are trained. This is like the manual, the procedures. You need to have those type of things in place. How do you deal with complaints? Sexual harassment or age discrimination. How do you deal with complaints in your company? How do you deal with equipment? Do you let people have trucks? Are they your trucks? Are they their trucks? All those types of things come into play. And then you actually you need an employee handbook. I've written an employee handbook for somebody. It's a lot that goes in it, but it's what the employee relies upon, and it helps them understand the decisions and the policies that an owner's made, and it shows them what happens if they violate them. Most of the time they may lose their job under violating certain policies in the employee handbook. So those are some very important things to have. And ultimately the chapter ends up with this responsibility, authority, and delegation. How you literally, who's responsible for what, who's got the authority to decide what needs to happen, and how you delegate to the various manager levels on down the line to a foreman of a carpentry crew. So that's going to wrap up 3. One of the things I'd like you to take a look at though are the review questions, and while we don't necessarily answer each one of them, just think about them in your mind. You don't have to put them all on paper. While our assignment this week might talk about some things like this, but it doesn't hurt for you to think about these chapter review questions. So I will be back shortly with my lecture on chapter 4.